The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back for another edition of the Nerdcast News Report on the Nerdcast Empire Monday morning edition. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. We're going to be running down a few of the news headlines you're going to need to know to get your week started here on this Monday morning. And we've got a little bit from pretty much all of our topics today on the Nerdcast News Report, getting you started Monday with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And as we get things started on this Monday, it's time to bring in Mike in the studio. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. We are now well into February. Let's get this month over with and get to spring. But yeah, a lot of news going on. Maybe not all the best news, but it's definitely something worth talking about. The water cooler. So
yeah,
let's talk about it.
Well, yeah, we got, just like I said, nothing. I mean, a couple of a little bit bigger items, but just a little bit of everything today. So we're going to get to that right out of the gate. And we're going to start with some somewhat good news, I think. Now, it wasn't good news at the end of the week and over the weekend, but the news that the PlayStation Network is back online after a pretty lengthy outage over the weekend. And PlayStation has announced that they will be compensating members following the outage. They're going to be compensating members with a 5-day service extension after the what they're terming a 24-hour PSN outage. Things came back online after a day. I think there are obviously a couple of questions about this. First off, kudos to Sony for deciding to give them a 5-day extension, because they don't have to do that. They could just say, that's just part of doing business, is sometimes things are going to be offline, and you just have to suck it up and deal with it. But the other side to it, too, is it really did feel like there was a lot of radio silence from Sony during this, and people were asking questions and not really getting the answers they were looking for, which is a little concerning. And obviously the cause of this outage is still kind of up in the air. A lot to unpack on this story, and curious to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think the problem here is that about an hour into the outage, it seemed like their goal was to downplay it as much as possible. Their ex-post on February 7th at 8:46 p.m. was simply, "We are aware some users might be currently experiencing issues with PSN. For more details, link." If this is a wide-scale outage, maybe you want to use a little stronger language than some users might be currently experiencing issues. Clearly, it was a bigger deal than that. 24 hours later, that they said, "Oh, it's been restored. You should be able to access online features. Sorry for the convenience." So just not a whole lot of information. Ultimately, the next day, they blame it on what was an operational issue, whatever that means.
Yeah, that's pretty vague.
Yeah, I think you owe your users a bit more information than that. And I think the problem, too, is I'm all for an extra 5 days of my PlayStation Plus. That's great. But this doesn't just impact people with PlayStation Plus. If you're using any streaming service that requires an online connection, a lot of single player games now require you to log in with your PlayStation Network account, and that's unusable. There's no compensation for those people if they're not regular subscribers to PlayStation Plus.
Yeah, you're just out of luck. And it goes into the bigger issue is not only do you have this requirement in a lot of cases to hook into the PlayStation Network, but just to have a proper internet connection is required for so many of these games. I think I've told the story on our other podcast that, I bought a PlayStation 5 at the end of 2024, and I was excited to play the new college football game and have no desire, at least at this point, to play it online. I just want to play the computer and play the game. And ended up having to buy a whole new router because evidently PlayStation 5s don't connect very well with the Spectrum routers that we have. So I had to buy another router just so that it would see that I was online so I could play this game that I have a physical copy of against the computer. Like, I'm not interested in playing on... It'd be different if I had online or if I had the PlayStation Network. Like, I just want to play this game that I bought. And that's incredibly frustrating to me. As this is kind of my first dive into the most advanced consoles that are out there that I all of a sudden have to have an internet connection to be able to play a game that I have a physical copy of.
Yeah, and I hate it because obviously I'm more of a retro guy. I do play current generation, but I'm very much of the mindset that I want a hard copy of my game. I want a game that's complete upon release. And I feel like somewhere along the way, gamers and the customer base lost all control over how they consume the product. I think they've all been conditioned to having all of their products digitally, not finished upon release, where they're constantly requiring patches. And unfortunately, because of that, the gaming industry, the companies, have been able to say, well, we're going to make sure that you're essentially not going to own this anymore. You're going to have to log in through us to use it. That makes it a lot easier for us to shill additional downloads like DLC, microtransactions, and we can ultimately revoke or limit your access to something if we feel the need to. I don't like, and you can make the same argument as far as movies and music goes. Like I don't like the idea that when I buy your product, I don't own your product, and my concern is that we're too far gone now to ever get things back to where the customer's in control.
It's probably going to take a big title of some kind getting revoked or getting pulled off and people not having it anymore after even having a physical copy, because that's the other thing I worry about. We've heard stories about games disappearing online and them saying, well, you didn't really own it to begin with, so too bad. That's a digital copy. I don't agree with it. I think it's terrible, but I at least understand the logic behind it. It's not, if you're just pulling a digital license. If they come back in a couple years and all of a sudden maybe the NIL lawsuit gets overturned with the NCAA and they decide, well, we shouldn't have been making college football games, and they're like, we know you have a physical copy of that, but you can't play that either.
You can't launch it. Sorry.
That's unacceptable to me. And my fear is that's where we're headed, where they're going to be able to tell you, your physical copy of this game is also not going to work because for whatever reason, you can't play this game anymore.
Well, and I think initially they were never clear about what they were selling you. I think because the gaming industry has been around for decades, you just assumed when you bought a game, you owned the game. And I think somewhere along the way, it was like, well, no, what we're selling you is a limited time access to something until we can no longer support it, no longer want to support it, for whatever reason, when we can somehow take it away from you, we're totally okay in doing that, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and like I said, that's not a good trend in gaming for sure, and certainly very concerned about where that is headed down the road. And again, I do applaud them giving the 5-day extension.
Yeah.
I think some answers about what caused it. It's just like when the electric goes out here and they're like, well, we don't know what happened. Like, well, we're paying for that. I would like to know what happened and know whether it's going to happen again. Like, you need to tell me what caused this. Why did you downplay it for 6 to 8 hours? And then what are you doing to make sure this doesn't happen again?
And I get it to some degree with video games. Obviously, production costs are getting ridiculous. They have to find a way to kind of tie you to them so they can keep making money beyond the initial sale. But my problem with that is that's not the customer's problem. You chose to spend $400 million to make a game that I might get 60 hours of enjoyment out of. I don't think it's reasonable. Like, not everyone needs to own a Rolls Royce. If every automaker decided all their cars were going to be, $100,000 luxury cars, people would stop buying cars.
Yeah.
And I feel like the gaming industry is pushing you in that direction. Well, we're spending this much money on every game, so we're going to have to charge you and keep charging you in perpetuity. At some point, we're going to see what bubble is left is just totally going to pop.
Well, what's going to happen is exactly what's happening in gaming is you're going to find out that your neighbor is a mechanic and they're going to be building cars out of their garage on the cheap that run and they're perfectly fine, don't get you to work, but they don't cost $100,000. And you're just going to be like, well, I can buy this car that my neighbor's made and I can get to work with it. And yeah, maybe it's not the fanciest thing, but I'm going to have fun and I can do it for a fraction of the cost. That's what's happening in gaming. We're on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. Go to Twitch. Go to a lot of other streaming pages. See how many of these just simple games that
Yeah.
streamers play every day because they're fun and they're cheap, and whatever fun they get out of it is almost a bonus because the games are so cheap.
Or you're going to see, and you have seen, a boom in the retro market.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many people, not even just playing retro games, but if you search on YouTube, just the amount of videos on ways to enhance that retro experience, whether it's by modding systems to allow, I'm watching a video recently on like the MemCard 2 Pro that'll basically allow you to load PS2 games from your memory card. Like totally taking the disk drive, which is obviously the kind of the weak point of those systems, out of the equation. I think something has to happen because this isn't sustainable, and for too long these companies have just been able to more or less produce over budgeted slop, and people eat it. And I think you're kind of reaching that tipping point.
Well, and again, as things like this happen where networks go offline, I think you're just adding fuel to the fire of what's going to be a big gamer backlash at some point, and maybe a bubble burst.
And it's just another thing, another kind of mark on Sony's record. They've had a rough way to go the last few years as far as just poor decisions, scandals, leaks. Obviously, with them owning Crunchyroll and Funimation, they kind of get all that baggage as well. It's been a rough time.
It has, for sure. But we'll certainly, if there's any further news on what might have caused this before we do our Wednesday podcast, we'll certainly pass that along then, which is a good time to remind you, we'll be back on Wednesday. Rebranding the Wednesday podcast also to a Nerdcast News Report. That doesn't mean we're not going to talk anime. We still will do that quite heavily on the Wednesday show. But just to keep all of our weekday podcasts the same, it'll be the Nerdcast News Report Wednesday. That's 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday. Looking forward to having you join us for that, either live or on the VOD. Let's get to some other news items quickly over the next few minutes. Obviously, we talked a lot about good WWE news, which means, just to be fair, we have to cover some not so good WWE news. And WWE has, or is in the process of, a pretty lengthy talent release. Tends to happen this time of year or sometimes after WrestleMania. You see on the screen the list of talent. This does not include Elektra Lopez, who was added to this list this weekend, but Sonya Deville, Blair Davenport, the authors of Pain, and Paul Ellering, Cedric Alexander, Isla Dawn, Giovanni Vinci, Carl Anderson, and Luke Gallows. The one thing we're going to talk about with this is, you look at this list and include Elektra Lopez, and there's kind of two categories of people. It's like, okay, I get it, and I see what you did here. And then there's like, did you really give this person or this group a chance to actually make it? Like, were they really given a fair shake? Because I think you can see both in this list of people that it's like, I understand. And then there's others, it's like, I don't really get it. And that's kind of hard as a wrestling fan to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of took down my notes and my thoughts on each of these. And for every AOP and Paul Ellering, where you kind of understand, certainly in the Ellering side, why they made the decision. I do kind of feel like AOP might have had something left on the table, but you kind of have that. But then you also have your Sonya Deville's, who I feel like they did everything they could to get her on television. I question sometimes why they chose to have her run as the same kind of character for the most part the entire time.
Yeah.
I feel like they put her in a position where there was really nothing wrong with her in-ring work and her look, but they always kind of portrayed her as this person you didn't want on your TV.
Yeah.
Like, nothing against her personally, but that was like a character choice where you just kind of were irritated by her presence. I thought that was odd, but again, she had numerous opportunities. They rebooted Giovanni Vinci how many times, and that never quite worked out. I think Gallows and Anderson are kind of more in the twilight of their career. Certainly Gallows, I would say. It's unfortunate that Carl Anderson was on the shelf when this happened, but the one that kind of shocks me the most still is Isla Dawn, because I feel like she had the charisma, she had the look. I think there was a lot more they could have done with her, and why they didn't, I don't really know.
Isla Dawn is kind of the crux of one of my biggest complaints about modern WWE. And again, we talk a lot of good things about WWE, but there are some things that I don't think they do a very good job of. And number one is still main roster women's booking, but specifically mid-card and tag teams.
Yeah.
You create these tag titles. I mean, first off, you have women's tag titles at NXT, which for those who maybe weren't watching NXT at the time, those tag titles did pretty well. They were defended regularly. They were treated as a serious part of the show, which isn't surprising because NXT treats the women as a serious part of their show. They're pretty much 50-50 with the men.
Yeah.
Then you decide to create main roster women's tag titles. You eventually get rid of the NXT ones, and then you have them in the worst storylines. I mean, they were probably at least indirectly involved in Sasha Banks and Naomi leaving the company. They have been on people that have gotten hurt, and once again, they're back on main event level talent. I mean, maybe Naomi's not to quite to the levels Bianca Belair, but you had Jade Cargill holding him till she got hurt. Instead of actually elevating tag teams, people who are not main event single stars, you're using them to basically, well, we don't want Belair challenging for the title right now, so we're going to put the tag titles on her to keep her out of the singles picture. Yeah. That's not how you're supposed to be using those. It doesn't make any sense. Like, that's just like your mid-card women's titles, which haven't been really handled all that well either, although Chelsea Green is awesome and Lyra Valkyria is awesome, and I look forward to seeing what they're going to do. They haven't really done much. They're stuck in kind of endless feuds or no feuds at all in the case of Valkyria. Yeah, to me, Isla Dawn falls into that category where, like, she's, and even Blair Davenport to some degree, like, why do you not have her in a tag team, like, in this tag division or battling for a mid-card title? It's just kind of strange, and I get that NXT has a ton of talented women and are adding more daily. They just added Jordan Grace, who I've heard rumor that she's going to start with NXT and then move her way
up. Probably a short run there, if I had to guess.
I would guess so. So I get, some of these are kind of clearing the decks for more talent to come in, but like I said, Dawn, like you said, that's the one that really kind of sticks out. It's like, I don't really understand that one. And you hope that, Alba Fire doesn't get lost in the shuffle now. Because obviously she's lost her tag partner. I mean, it's clear they see her just from looking back to her like NXT UK.
She was like the longest reigning NXT UK women's champion, I believe.
So clearly they see her in a little bit different light than Isla Dawn, and maybe that is the other purpose of this, is to kind of clear out, her ability to go for a singles title.
Well, it felt like initially when they paired her up with Isla Dawn and NXT, it was like, does she need to be in a tag team? Like, what are we doing? Like, I thought she was kind of main event level ready. I'm not sure what this is. Another thing I think is interesting is that for some of these women, I think maybe their ability to get over through promos is questionable. But why, you had at that period of time where you had Robert Stone as like the manager of some of the women.
Yeah.
And while I'm not sure about who they paired him up with, his time with Chelsea Green was entertaining, but why don't they consider that more often, just giving some of these women, especially like your more, maybe like a Sonya Deville, whose whole shtick is she's like tough. MMA tough kind of woman. Why can't you just give them the Brock Lesnar treatment, as far as give them a person who speaks for them? Like, do they not like the optics of potentially having a man speak for a woman? Because I think in the world of wrestling, that almost makes you seem like more of a badass.
Yeah, and honestly, a guy that comes to mind, I have no idea he'd be interested in this role, but like somebody who I think would make sense in building a stable like this is someone like Josh Barnett. You bring him in and you basically give him a stable of Bloodsport wrestlers. Yeah. And then he's the one that delivers the promos for these wrestlers and just says, look, you're not going to see them coming, but when they show up, you're going to know they're there, and basically build them as this just death squad that he has put together and trained, and like, hey, WWE didn't know what to do with these people, so they send them to me at Bloodsport, and I've made killers out of, it's just...
And you could build, even if it's just a tag team of just monster MMA type wrestlers. I mean, that could solve your tag team problem right there. You basically just have them run roughshod over the division, hold the titles for an extended period of time.
Build up challengers.
Yeah, I feel like they do a much better job with the women than any other company does, I think. But there are still some things that you see in men's wrestling that they could easily just port over to the women's to give them another vehicle to get over, and they seem hesitant to do some of these things.
Yeah, I don't understand it, and every time a big event passes, you just hope, okay, now's the time we're gonna get a serious focus. I mean, you've got your 2.5 hour Netflix Raw, you've got 3 hours SmackDown. Like, well, let's make a little bit of an effort to build this up, because again, that's the number one thing in wrestling, and you hear people complain about this person's not over, that person's not over. People are who they are presented to be, and you can't get over sitting and catering. You just can't. Like, even someone like Candice LeRae, who's been on TV pretty regularly now, starting to at least get over a little bit with the crowd. It's what you've got to do. You've got to put them out there and let them try to fend for themselves a little bit, and put them with somebody like Nia Jax, who's done amazing work, and you can kind of build something there.
Candice LeRae, and even Nia Jax. Not that Nia Jax shouldn't be up near the top of the card, but I feel like if you had them run in a tag division for a while together, you kind of have the small and then the big monster as a team. I think that would work really well. Again, you have the people, just put them in positions to succeed.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the layoffs are, every company lays people off. We've both been, I was laid off about this time last year, so I totally understand how that works. The difference is, obviously, with WWE, they've been giving out big money contracts to some of your favorites, and people are happy about that because they want people to stay. But it's like most companies, when they lay people off, they either don't replace them or they replace them with cheaper people.
Yeah.
WWE, there will be some NXT people move into these roles, and they'll be probably cheaper. But there are also some people that are, if they bring back the Bella Twins and put them in the tag division and give them the tag titles, people are going to be like, well, how much money did you spend to do that? That probably would have paid for almost everybody on this list, with maybe the exception of Gallows and Anderson, who probably were making pretty decent money.
I always kind of figured Gallows and Anderson would end up doing something production-wise with WWE or training-wise. I felt like they could have potentially had a future beyond their in-ring career with the company. And maybe they still could. I don't know.
Who knows? I guess it depends on what they want to do going forward. But we'll keep an eye on this story. Obviously, if there are any further layoffs announced, we'll pass those along on Wednesday. But again, a lot of good things going on at WWE, but I think there are still some things that you kind of need to take a closer look at and make sure that we're calling out correctly. A couple shorter stories to wrap up before we get to the Nerdcast Express. Speaking of a guy who has spent time in WWE, Joe Hendry, of course, the TNA champion currently, is trying everything he can to get his name out there, maybe trying to work for that match with John Cena. He is pitching that he would like his theme, I Believe in Joe Hendry, to be used in Grand Theft Auto 6. Of course, that game is supposed to come out in Q4 of 2025. People are super excited about that. You still see people streaming GTA 5 all these years later. But Joe Hendry wants to be in that game, one part of their music rotation. Again, Joe Hendry has kind of figured out how to be a viral indie wrestler in the right ways that has got him on WWE's radar, and probably will get him a WWE contract when his TNA deal expires sometime next year.
Yeah, again, this goes back to what's important in the world of professional wrestling, and it's really about selling yourself and getting over. It's not so much about the in-ring work. Looking at the post on X this morning, it has now reached 32,000 likes and 2.7 million views, so that's kind of a big deal. The soundtrack in Grand Theft Auto games is always huge. I remember playing Vice City and just, in the car playing the radio, and that's a big thing, and you got to assume that GTA 6 is going to be a massive game, considering the legs that GTA 5 has had over the years, and how many console generations it has appeared on. So if you can get your game, or if you can get your song on that game, I mean, that's giving your song legs that you couldn't even have imagined to be possible.
Yeah, it's wild what he's done, and he's incredibly entertaining, and the pop he got at the Royal Rumble was fantastic for a crowd.
For a guy that some of those people probably had never seen before.
Yeah.
They've heard of him, but not so much in the ring.
And again, I just wonder how much. I don't know. I have a TikTok. We have a TikTok through Nerdcast Empire. I don't use it very much, but I also wonder, has his music shown up on there? Is that why he's getting the younger demographic because they're familiar with that song and his face and everything that goes with that? the dude has figured it out, and he's probably, like I said, he's probably going to get a WWE contract out of it. He saw the picture with Drew McIntyre this weekend that he posted with McIntyre saying "I believe." So, if you can get him his match with Cena, if Cena shows up in TNA Wrestling to have a match with Joe Hendry, like how wild would that be?
Can't even imagine.
That would make that partnership even bigger than TNA could have ever imagined. But love Joe Hendry. Hope this works out for him, and hopefully he can continue to make appearances on WWE television as well. One final note before we get to the end is a report from Screen Rant that talks about the studio that is doing Don to Don is going to be reviving Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell obviously started with the movie back in 1995. Standalone Complex is a show that I really enjoyed. I think if you're a sci-fi fan, I think you'll really dig that. It had a phenomenal English dub. The Bang Zoom dub at the time was just really, really good. But now it looks like Science Saru, the company that is behind Don to Don, which has certainly been very successful, is going to be creating a new TV anime for Ghost in the Shell coming up in 2026. I think people are really excited because this studio seems to be doing really cool things, and Don to Don, like I said, seems to be doing really well. And it'll be interesting to see what their take on Ghost in the Shell is, but I'm sure people are going to be super stoked for it in 2026.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Ghost in the Shell film. That was such a huge film in terms of kind of presenting cyberpunk culture and aesthetic to entertainment. Yeah, the exhibition in Tokyo in 2026 should be pretty cool. Just kind of all things celebrating the franchise. This will be making an appearance at it, the new anime from Science Saru. Their name, I mean, it's been thrown around a lot lately as far as just kind of doing out of the box, just different looking anime, and just the animation style that they have is certainly different. They've worked on titles like Ping Pong the Animation, Devilman Crybaby, Keep Your Hands Off Azoken, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Just a lot of stuff with varying styles, and people were stoked when they were tied to Don to Don, and that's done really well. So this could be pretty cool.
And all those shows you mentioned are all not just different styles, very unique styles.
Different from each other.
Yeah. Like it's kind of wild that these shows, look so different and yet all done by the same studio. And I would think, what they could do in the world that Ghost in the Shell comes in. It's a very vibrant, like technological world, and it'll be interesting to see what their take on that is. Yeah. And I think, I'm excited for it. Like I said, hopefully it's one of those things that somewhere down the road they can get as much of the dub cast back for that as possible, because like I said, the Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex dub was another one of those all-timers, and certainly, hopefully, as many of those actors and actresses that are still active, hopefully they can get all of those people back. But before we get to the end, just a reminder again, we'll be back on Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern for another Nerdcast News Report. We'll be back on Friday as well for another edition. And then next Sunday, it'll be another episode of Music Weekly. We are on to the music of January the 31st. We had an episode last night. If you've not checked that out, you can check that out on the VOD. You can also check that out on our YouTube page at Nerdcast Empire. If you want to hear the Bonfire song, you'll have to find that on the YouTube page because Twitch decided that was a no-go, but really good song. So, again, that'll be coming up 7 o'clock Eastern Sunday night, another episode of Music Weekly. Are you ready for the Empire Express?
Do it.
Let's wrap this thing up today. Nevermore notes in an article on Blabbermouth they received over 650 submissions for a new vocalist and bassist. That seems like a crazy number, doesn't it?
I'd like to know how that compares to the average fairly attractive job posting on like Indeed or any other job site, because maybe that's not so crazy, but you got to think with a band with a name recognition and Nevermore, they could be really selective in their vocalist and bassist choice. But can't wait for an announcement on that. The official accounts for City the Animation announced the new anime based on the Keiji Arari manga is scheduled to air in July 2025. Are you excited for this?
Absolutely. Of course, he's the one that did Nichijou, which was just a wild, anything-goes type of comedy. City the Animation is supposed to be a spiritual successor to Nichijou, so super excited to check that one out. Japanese publisher Shogakukan has announced that they'll be bringing a manga reader to the Nintendo Switch on March 13th. Would you read manga on your Switch?
With the rise of handheld handheld PCs, I think any additional apps and features the Switch can have that kind of bridge the gap of what a PC can do compared to what a Switch can do is a great thing. I'm more of a physical collector, but I could certainly see checking this out. New WWE superstar Penta has said he would like longtime 49ers tight end George Kittle to work with him in WWE. That's going to happen, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's going to happen. It's probably going to happen at WrestleMania. George Kittle's already done stuff with WWE, and now you have the guy that it's his guy. So, like, there's no doubt that something crazy is going to happen, and it's going to be sports entertainment at its finest. Finally, the 20th and final episode of Dragon Ball Diamond will air on February 28th in Japan. How has it been so far? Because I know you've been checking it out, and are you surprised to see it end so soon?
Yeah, I'm 5 episodes in. It's been a fun ride so far. If you can watch it without putting much thought into the overall series continuity, I think you'll be fine. Child Goku is a classic character. Having Stephanie Nadolny back is certainly even better. I think it's going to do what it needs to do and kind of get out. It doesn't need to stick around a long time.
Yeah, they're not dragging this out for a money grab. It looks like it's get in, tell the story, and get out, which I think, and is kind of still it's maybe a little surprising for the Dragon Ball universe. Not really their style, but I think I do appreciate that as well. And that's going to wrap things up for this edition of the Nerdcast News Report for your Monday. You're all set to go for the new week with all the latest news and notes from all of our coverage areas here on the Nerdcast Empire. Mine will be back on Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time for another edition of the Nerdcast News Report. We'll be getting you updated once again on what is going on in the nerdy world that we cover. Big thanks to everyone for joining us. Big thanks to Rachel for joining us there at the end. I'm sure she had a late night as well with all the Super Bowl watch parties and everything like that. But we appreciate everybody for checking us out this morning. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to Mike for joining me in studio. And a big thanks to you for listening wherever you may be doing so. That's going to wrap things up. We'll be back on Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time for another edition of the Nerdcast News Report. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.